Good morning, everybody. We're just letting folks come into the room. We'll give folks another minute or two to join us. So folks are still joining. That's okay. I was very proud of myself for actually waiting those 2 minutes because I usually, Ariel, usually just jump in because I get excited. But I'm really excited for this conversation today. Again, good morning, everybody. My name is Ayana Wallace. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the training specialist with Ujima Inc. We are the National Center on Violence Against Women in the Black Community. And welcome to our webinar. This is Teen Dating Violence Prevention 101. We stand for healthy relationships. And I'm so happy to welcome our two panelists today, Ariel Faulkner and Grant Owens. Ariel and I befriended each other in the field and have really been able to work together for a while now. Grant, we're just budding in our friendship, but he is a great resource and a great ally to the movement. Ariel works for the DOVE program as a community outreach coordinator and case manager. She is a proud graduate of Towson University, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Sociology and Anthropology with a concentration in criminal justice. Prior to joining the DOVE program as a staff member in 2018, Ariel served as an admissions counselor for the National Job Corps program, where she helped mentor and guide at-risk youth and provide them with second and even third chances to get an education and to get some trade to be able to continue their life's work and maintain gainful employment. Ariel has also held jobs relating to creating a positive social impact in Baltimore and beyond, and has worked as a helping hand in developing and coordinating projects that are really aimed at revitalizing some of the historic and culturally based areas in the city, in Baltimore City, similar to the work that she did in Durham, North Carolina, and Lafayette, Louisiana. As a survivor and someone who has also lost a close family member to domestic violence, Ariel takes an enormous amount of pride in the work that she does as part of the DOVE program. And her ultimate goal is to really one day be able to provide enough education, training, and support to people and communities devastated by the tragedies of domestic violence, and really be able to work to outwork herself. But in the meantime, she's really tirelessly working and dedicated to providing as much education, advocacy, and support to those in need. And then we also have Grant Owens, who's an art activist, filmmaker, student. Grant Owens took to art at a very young age. Growing up in the suburbs of Baltimore, he initially aspired to become a painter and a writer. In high school, though, he found the stories of many different stories and authors who he took to, including Wim Wenders, Andrei Tarkovsky, and Steve McQueen. At 17, he wrote and directed his first short film, Rabbit Man, the story of a boy confronting the death of his father, as well as Staying Tile, a documentary series on teen dating violence. And he plans to release some more work late 2021. So we're really looking out for that and excited about the upcoming work that you have coming. And so if you also, before we get going, if you wanted to just state your pronouns so that everyone knows them, feel free. And then for all of our attendees, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box, your pronouns, where you're from, what program you're with. And then also feel free to use the Q&A box if you have any questions that you would like us to try to get to at the end of our conversation. So I do have for today just a couple of basic discussion questions that are going to lead our conversation. But again, we're open, we're conversational, and we're excited to have this conversation. At least I know I am. And so, if we're okay, we can just jump into it. But again, when you first start speaking, feel free to introduce your pronouns as well. And so, I'll start with question one. Before moving into the field of domestic and intimate partner violence, what had you learned about teen dating violence during childhood, if anything? So, Ariel,
I'll
want to
answer
start?
that one. Yeah, so my pronouns are she, her, hers. Um, I think growing up, I didn't have much messaging around dating violence or intimate partner violence. However, when I was 15, my aunt was murdered by her intimate partner in Baltimore City. And I think that was like the shift of it. Like, I was coming of age, I was dating. I think my mom really didn't worry too much because I went to an all girl private school. But I do remember having specific conversations about, my grandmother would tell me, like, you never hit a man because you don't know his breaking point or his power, right? And so that was the only kind of conversation I had is like, never hit a man, never hit a man. But specifically when my aunt was murdered, it was like, you don't even argue. And much more, you don't let anybody put your hands on you. So that was kind of the only talks that I had, and I was in my late teens. So other than that, even though I was surrounded by what I would call in retrospect, a lot of unhealthy relationships, not necessarily abusive, but just what I know now. And then looking back, it's like, you know, um, yeah, those kind of things, those subtle messages of unhealthy relationships and
Mm-hmm.
lack of boundaries were surrounded by me. But it was just limited to, don't let anybody put their hands on you. That's it.
Right. Grant, what about you? What did you learn about teen dating violence during childhood?
So my pronouns first off are him, his. I my sort of information on dating violence was sort of limited to what I was learning in school. So pretty limited in that sense. I guess more of the information and things I picked up was through different forms of media and through different forms of artwork, through different forms of writing. And just hearing those stories and trying to step into the perspective of those characters and things like that. Um, what it resulted in when I tried to practice that in my film about domestic violence was just a bit of ignorance. I feel like there are things you can learn and there are things you can hear, but you know being removed from certain experiences and then trying to represent those experiences can sometimes result in something that you're not too proud of. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as far as my background with learning about domestic violence before I started working on it in film.
And I think that's something that a lot of us experience growing up. Like we may hear tidbits, but we don't really understand like the nuances and the complexities and really what it's really about. And so that was actually Grant. You got sort of to my next question of were you having conversations about dating boundaries and healthy relationships in school?
We were definitely having conversations about consent, conversations about um, just what is yes, what is no, what is right, what is wrong. But those conversations, like you said, didn't really get into the nuances of, um, how kind of real life works. And um, I think as a result, yeah, it sort of hindered my understanding of the nuances of this topic. Yeah.
What about you, Ariel? Did we hearing those in school?
Not at first, but I will say it shifted when Yardley Love was murdered by her intimate partner at the University of Virginia. So I went to a private school, an all-girl private school in Baltimore City. And the private school community was very familiar with Yardley. And I believe I was in maybe the 10th or the 11th grade. And so for all girls schools, it's kind of like taboo, right? They don't really want to touch on dating. you know, it's not something that's really happening. But when she was murdered and that whole thing happened, I remember they assembled the entire high school because she had been teammates through across with a lot of the girls there. And so for them, it hit close to home. And it was kind of the turning point that they recognized, like, this is something that is potentially happening amongst our teens. And so from that point on, because I may have been in like the 11th or the 10th grade, we started talking about it more. My sister is now a junior at my same high school, and they now have like a One Love club. So I think it's being talked about more now than it had been when I was in high school almost 10 years ago.
Right. And
Going
so
to,
do you think that for a lot of other teens that the words like healthy relationships and boundaries and respect, like, do you think that really means what we as adults would hope it would mean? Like, do you feel like people are seeing the connection?
I mean, I don't know. I don't really think so, right? I feel like teens, they, I don't want to limit it and saying that they don't really have the capacity to communicate like full adults, right? But I think what's healthy to us in our adult years may just seem like, okay, that's whatever, that's old people stuff to them. And I'm just basing it off of conversations that I have with my little sister about healthy relationships and boundaries, right? So for them, a lot takes place on social media. Someone gets mad and disrespects them on social media, it turns into this whole thing, right? But then by, you know, the next week it blows over. And I'm constantly having conversations with her, like, no matter if it blows over, you guys reconcile, it's not okay. Like, that's not healthy. And to her, it's just like, well, this is what teenagers do, right? This is how we communicate. This is how we get out our frustration. And then it's like back to normal. And so I'm constantly having conversations with the young people I know, like, that's not normal. You know, you don't disrespect your your significant other on Twitter, on Instagram, TikTok. You have to set boundaries. And I think for them, they don't really know what that looks like or how it actually plays out. And especially now that everything is virtual, I mean, even including schooling, it's really hard to have those conversations with them because they're using so many different platforms. Um, it's really hard for it to be concrete for them, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with that, Ariel. And going off of that point, different social media platforms have kind of their own language that I feel like a lot of parents, guidance counselors, teachers um, don't or aren't privy to because they didn't grow up with it. And so the curriculum that we're learning, specifically in high school, um, you know, can only go so far as to, you know, determine what's right and wrong in person. Whereas I feel like with this social media landscape, people have this sort of confidence or hubris or just whatever to sort of be something they're not in real life. And whether that something is, you know, who they truly are deep down, I feel like social media just creates a weird plane where you can really express these different things. And that isn't so much touched upon in the high school curriculum and learning about boundaries and consent and things like that. One example I have is in high school, there was this huge ring of people trading girls' nudes just over Snapchat. And it was strange because it was this thing that you would hear about in different group chats and things like this. So and so had their nudes exposed. And you would hear about it at home on your phone, and then you go into school, and it would be, you know, somewhat hush hush, but you'd see that, like, how affected this person who had their nude photos exposed was, and how they couldn't really talk about it because it happened in a different, you know, sort of plane. So that's just kind of one example I have of that and the difference between online and in person.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I mean, it really got me, both of your points really got me to thinking about how, even when it's not something you truly identify with, how easy it is to sort of get swept up and just, oh, I'm just going to reshare it. It's sort of funny. You know, folks are going to laugh at it or whatever. And
Mm.
so
Yeah.
folks aren't really being able to even determine for themselves what their boundaries are because they're just so caught up in a lot of other stuff that's happening or other language that's being used. Um, all
And
right, so
on
that's
the,
great. Next, go ahead.
or sorry, if I could expand that point, I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people's boundaries because of who they follow are sort of um,
Oh.
broken down every day. Like somebody will retweet something into my timeline that I would never, look up by myself. And it's like, oh, I guess this is kind of in my life now. I guess I've seen this sort of thing. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say to that point.
Yeah, thank you. And so were you seeing violence between other teens or between teens while you were in school? I know you mentioned the whole sharing nude pictures or revenge porn, as we call it in Maryland. You were seeing that in school. I remember when I was growing up in school, I think it was like freshman year of high school, I saw a boy just straight up punch his girlfriend in the stomach in the hallway. And like nobody really knew what to do at all. There were no teachers around. So we all just sort of looked and then kept moving. Were you witnessing things like that? Were you witnessing outside of school? What was happening in your social settings?
So in school, no, because again, my landscape in school predominantly white, all girl, right? In my neighborhood, though, I now looking back on it, I mean, I didn't recognize it. It didn't seem like anything out of the norm for boys and girls to roughhouse, to call each other names. Like that's pretty much what I witnessed. And back then, I'm just like, well, whatever. Kids called her out her name. She defended herself. Or I remember one time they were playing and he body slammed her and she got mad, and then it just led to this whole thing. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, but we were like 16. But it just escalated, and so to me it was just like, people do it. No one ever had like a conversation to say to me specifically, or any of the people that I knew like, don't hit each other or whatever. Teens roughhouse all the time. That's how you show your love. um but now looking back on it, I'm like, geez, like we need to erase that whole, put your hands on your significant other, arguing, calling each other names. And I think a lot of people, especially for teens, they don't realize that intimate partner abuse is just more than physical. It is verbal, it's psychological. I know I see people who share social media accounts that go through their significant other's phones, text messages, DMs. And I think helping teens to realize that is the makings of an unhealthy relationship. Maybe it's not necessarily physically abusive, but that is unhealthy relationship behavior. Like, where is the trust?
And so many people don't consider teen dating relationships to be legitimate relationships. Why is it important that we do legitimize teen dating relationships in the many different forms that they may come or that they may present itself?
I think it's important to legitimize these relationships for both positive and negative reasons. Like, I think it's important for people, especially young people, to realize what they're doing has weight and will affect like sort of the rest of their life, especially in like how they love their partner, how they show their partner affection and things like that. But it's also important to legitimize them because of the negative. You know, if a case of domestic violence were to happen in a teenage relationship, and then one of the partners were to go tell their parents and hear like, oh, that's not like, you don't understand what love really is, and things like that. I feel like they may, you know, devalue their own emotions and sort of compartmentalize that very real, very significant experience they went through as, and chalk it up to just being like, oh, this is just high school. Yeah.
I would say it's very important to legitimize it. One, because statistics show us that they experience teen dating violence at very similar rates to what adults experience intimate partner violence. So I believe the statistics for teen is like 1 in 3, right? Compared to 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. So we know that they're experiencing this. So it's happening. So we have to create a climate where they're okay with speaking about it, right? Because in my opinion, I believe that statistic is probably much higher. But because we look at kids like they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know what they're going through, a lot of them feel, a lot less compelled to come forward, or a lot less compelled to disclose to a trusted family member or friend that this is what they're experiencing. And much more, if we don't keep having these conversations and validating and affirming their feelings and everything that they're going through, they're not even going to know where to look out for help, or where what resources are available in their community if we just delegitimize it or make it, dismiss or minimize their feelings and their current relationships. And I also
Right.
think that Maryland, I think it was the governor's office of crime control and prevention. They released a study in 2018 about teen dating violence in Maryland. And that's where I got the statistic 1 in 3. But I believe from that same report, they even broke it down about like race and partner violence or teen dating violence was happening much more in the African American community as well as the Hispanic community. So those numbers were much higher for the amount of girls and boys who were experiencing teen dating violence before they actually reached adulthood. So it's very prevalent. I guess that's my point.
Right. And I appreciate you adding that. And I do want to just expand to say, we want to just always clarify that just because rates may be higher in certain communities, like the African American community, doesn't mean our communities are more violent. It means that there's a lack of resources. It means there's a lack of protective factors. It means there are systems issues. And so all of that will compound to really impact their experience with dating violence and with seeking help and gaining help, really. So Grant, can you tell us more about how you got into your work, how you got into this work with your filmmaking, and why it was important for you to be able to share these stories about domestic violence?
Sure. So the films we're talking about, specifically the one I made about domestic violence, I made that in my freshman year of high school, and it was kind of my first, attempt at making a film. I had known that, the movies I liked, the ones I resonated with a lot, always had female protagonists. So I wanted my protagonist to be a woman. And a part of that was a lot of thinking about like, okay, what's a uniquely, female experience that I could show that would create drama. And that's where I think a lot of, looking back, a lot of my resentment for the film comes from, is because I was trying so hard to talk about something I cared about, talk about something I felt was important, but talk about it with the perspective that I could never have. So that's kind of how I got into that work. It was less interest in, you know, actual domestic violence and more so interest in how can I create good drama. And as a result of making the film and watching the film and hearing people's reactions to the film, hearing people's problems with the film, that kind of started my process into re-examining, my own views of domestic violence, and just sort of my own views on authorship and perspective in different work.
And so looking back on it now, what's like one or two things that you had either wished you had known prior to making the film, or that, like, if you were to redo the film, what would you change?
Um, well, I would take myself out of the film. A big reason I wanted to make this film was because I wanted to try acting. And so I had a minor role in the film, but it's the role that for some reason resolves all of the domestic violence. So that's one thing I would change. I would re-examine like how how these issues of domestic violence actually turn out. And in a lot of cases, like I feel that a 2-hour long movie or a 15-minute long movie or 30-minute long movie does not give the right amount of time or a just amount of time for the issue. I feel as if my protagonist in the film was just a very kind of pushed back protagonist, in the sense that she was just describing all this stuff that happened to her, and then other people were solving her issues, which in the real world, is good. There's, plenty of resources that help women, get through these issues of domestic violence. But the way I portrayed it, I looking back at
You would
it.
have given her more agency.
Yeah, exactly. Would have
Yeah.
given her more agency. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's really important though. Because when we were, when my team was first talking about the film, we were about to watch it. And then we heard that you were like, no, don't watch it. There were so many things I wanted to do differently. And I just love the growth of like the growth and the understanding and the insight to be like, all right, this was my understanding as a younger person. Here's where my understanding is now. And here's the vast difference that it may look like. So I just love that you're able to look back at your work and say, yes, some of it may be flawed. Here's what I would do differently. I want to make sure folks actually have voice that they need. I want to make sure that there isn't just this hero archetype coming in and saving the day, because that's a lot of what we talk about in the field anyways, of like, how are you support? How are you actually doing bystander intervention? How are you actually making sure that survivors have voice? And so I really applaud you for, being able to take that look back at your work and say, here's what I would do differently. And
I
so,
appreciate that recognition, but I think it's important to state that I did not come to that by myself. I think I am my harshest critic as far as my work is concerned, like the quality of it. But as far as the themes were concerned, it took a lot of people sort of pointing out things that I would have never caught because I was caught up with other parts of the film for me to kind of have this sort of breakthrough. So definitely was not, self-cultivated.
right, right. And I mean, even when it's not, it's still really important to be able to have folks to say, no, you're sort of missing the mark, or there's more in depth to this conversation. So do you, or how would you speak to college age men about dating violence now?
Hmm. Very interesting question. Um, I think college dating violence is um, it's sort of hard for me, or it's not hard for me to see necessarily, but because I'm not in, one building where I know every single person like I was in high school, it's sort of harder for me to gauge what that is like from my, I guess, perspective. But knowing just about what happens on college campuses, about date rape, about these frat parties that are for just getting women drunk and trying to take advantage of them. I don't really know what you say to the guys doing that. I just know that it's ugly, it's gross, it's inhumane, it's yeah, it's all this bad. I guess stop it is what I would say, but um yeah, with these issues, I feel a lot of it's hard to not be overwhelmed or result to apathy because the issue seems so big. Um, and I guess just taking it one person at a time is how I'm approaching it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Right. Thank you. And so folks are asking for the name of the film. I feel like folks still are interested in seeing it, even though,
So it's not currently on YouTube as a public video. For the sake of this webinar, I wouldn't mind posting it in the chat. It's called Stained Tile. So yeah, I'll upload it to the chat and you can watch it. Yeah.
Thank you, Grant. All right, Ariel, I have a couple questions for you now. To whatever extent you feel comfortable, would you be able to share your experience with dating violence as a survivor?
Yeah, sure. So I will say, I will preface it with this. My experience with dating violence occurred in college, and what it taught me is never say never. So prior to experiencing or being in an abusive relationship, I always thought like, that could never be me. That would never be me. A man will never put his hands on me, and nor will I ever be in that relationship. And so when I was in college, I dated someone that where I thought at least I was familiar with this person. We had a lot of mutual friends. I never had anyone say anything bad to me about him. I just always thought that he was a nice guy. I mean, on paper, he's a nice guy. He was, at this point, went for his master's. He was a part of a well-known fraternity. and just very, very, very active in his community. And so when we started dating, I'm not sure if everyone else has like a statewide database, but I searched his name in K-Search, Maryland K-Search, and I actually saw that he had like a prior domestic violence like charge, like a protective order or something like that. And so I went to him, when our first date, I was like, just being fully transparent, I want to ask you about this. Like, this is something that was concerning to me. And of course, this person was very retrospectively like manipulative, had a way with words, had a way of downplaying the situation, really. And I just very clearly remember like telling my big cousin, who's like a sister to me, like, oh my God, she's so perfect, but there's this one thing. Like, he said it was nothing, basically. And she told me very like distinctively, like, a man who abuses a woman will not flat out tell you that they abuse a woman, right? So I just was like, she doesn't always, what she's talking about. I'm like looking for love, and it's like the perfect candidate. But I think that was like the first red flag. We would always argue very violently, more specifically about money. So it wasn't even that he made more than I did or I made more than him. I was just really good with budgeting. And he was very, very controlling around that, like telling me what I should do with my money. And then one particular day, that argument escalated to something physical. He strangled me. He very badly assaulted me. And I think what I learned from working in the fields is like, when you're in that situation, survivors either, kick into fight, flight, or freeze. And my fight senses kicked in, right? So there was this whole, thing. And I very, very, very clearly remember him saying, like, you can't call the police because you hit me. If you call them, then they'll arrest you too. So, I left, and I didn't realize the extent of my injuries until the very next morning. I was strangled so badly that I could not even talk the next morning. Like, my throat was swollen. I had bruises everywhere. And I just remember feeling like so much shame around it, like keep questioning myself, like, how did I end up here? How did I get in this situation? Should I have called the police? Do I want to make a report? And at the time, I was just freshly out of college. I was looking for a job. And so I was like, I don't want anything on my record. Like, what if they, just look at me like an angry Black woman, or this is like a mutual assault? And I just kind of hidden that. So for a long time, I didn't talk about it. I was very, very ashamed. And it really impacted me. And so the only thing good that I would say came out of it is being in my current position now. So because he was a member of a fraternity, he wanted me to join the sorority. And I ended up going to one of like the interest fairs or something like that. And my current boss, that she had like a table, like an information table. And this is prior to the assault, but we had already had problems. And so just going over, I went and grabbed some information and was just kind of curious. So fast forward after being assaulted by my intimate partner, I was in AmeriCorps. I needed to do like a service project, and I reached out to her, and she let me volunteer. And then I volunteered for almost maybe a year and a half, and then she created a position for me. And it wasn't actually until I got in that position that I felt ready to advocate for myself and for people who look like me, people who were in similar situations that I personally knew, and really just begin to be dedicated around, no matter if you defend yourself against someone who is physically assaulting you, you do have a right to speak up. You do have a right to seek out services, no matter, what that person tells you, no matter what it may look like. I struggled so much with giving the word victim like a name associated with me. I just think it was something that just was totally foreign to me. Like, I never thought that I would be a domestic violence victim. And so I think when I stopped fighting with that word, because it's just, I've always been private about my life. I've never wanted sympathy for anything. I've kind of learned that from my mom. Things happen, you pick up, you move on. And it just caused me so much stress, anxiety. And when I started giving names and to the things that happened to me, to my experiences, and started talking about it, it was like empowering a little bit. Um, so yeah, and that was the first. I mean, it only took one time. I didn't go back. That was just it for me. I mean, he's probably walking around scot-free, just thinking like, no one knows what happens. But again, like the red flags were there: the manipulation, the control, the isolation. And I think what I had to realize, in a lot of what we talk about in the field, is that isolation isn't always so malicious, right? It's the you seen your friends, all your life, like spend Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night in the house with me. Um, why, you talk to your friends all day. Why do you want to go out for drinks? Like stay in the house with me. So those kind of things were happening. And I was like slowly and slowly, like more and more just spending time with him. And, we were in this very toxic situation living together. And when it happened, I mean, I didn't have any qualms about telling my friends or my family what happened, because those were the people I could come to, just based on conversations like, don't let anybody put your hands on you. I didn't feel comfortable talking to them about the verbal abuse, but the physical abuse is where I drew the line. But that was pretty much the messaging that I had always received. And then I look back on it, it's like it could have been avoided. When I asked him about his record and he saw that should have been my clue. The arguments, the control of the finances, that should have been another clue. But again, I just did not have the knowledge that I have now.
And I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think it's really important for people to hear not only from a young adult's perspective, but also from a young Black woman of like, it wasn't just that I didn't know what to do. It was him telling me, what happens when the police come? Because that's already a fear for a lot of folks in our community of just simple interactions with the police. So, there's already the trope of the angry Black woman. How am I going to navigate that? There's already folks telling me like, you're never going to be a victim. So how are they going to perceive it? The shame that goes into it. All of those things really play a factor into why folks seek help or not, why folks are seen as credible or worthwhile victims or not. And so I think it's really important for us as advocates, us as community members, us as support systems to be able to sort of take a step back from ourselves to say, all of these other things that we thought we knew, maybe we don't actually know what people need, or maybe we don't actually know how people are dealing with stuff behind closed doors. Because there is a lot of it of like, oh, that's their business. Like, really don't get involved unless something gets really bad. Let them figure it out. But if people had more guidance and more language to be able to understand what's happening, like, again, a lot of this could be avoided, or a lot of folks wouldn't find themselves in relationships with folks who don't know how to keep their hands to themselves, or to not be, violent and with their language. So again, really appreciate you sharing all of that, and really still interested to hear more about how you use your experience or just your understanding as a survivor in the work that you do now. So when folks are coming into your hospital-based program, how were you able to sort of get through to them or be a support to them?
I would say what I've noticed is that when you put yourself in proximity with the people and what they're experiencing. So sometimes I try so hard not to self-disclose, right? But I find that when I do, that's the point where I feel like my clients not connect. Because for our program, 70% of the clients that we have are African American women. So it's good for them to see someone not only doing the work, but someone who's been in that situation. And so very often I find more women who felt the way I did. Like, I'm strong. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. Why did I let this happen? And just taking the extra step on my behalf to just, we can't predict these things. We don't know what we're going to do, right? We're told a lot like what we should do, especially as Black women, like, you fight back, you get the frying pan, you get the you have all these different things. But for women who actually go through this on a daily basis, sometimes they do freeze, sometimes they do run, sometimes they go back. And I've really tried to take the no shame approach because it's silencing, and just having them sort of say like, oh, okay. Like I have clients all the time who say like you went through it, like how did you get here? Like how do I get, to a point where I can tell my story or share? I think having those conversations just very, very candidly with clients is more empowering than we know. And that's the approach that I take, really, is just trying to help them understand that we're not the problem, right? Like these things happen because of the climate that we're in and because of, certain norms or social norms that are like upheld that are very outdated. Um, but there's help, really. And I think what I love to see is more and more women and more women of color reaching out for resources, counseling in particular. And a lot of that comes from just having a face similar to their own that they feel like they can relate to.
So I once spoke to a parent. I was at a conference and he came up, I was tabling, he came up to talk to me about domestic violence. And he was saying that he had 8 children, most of them were girls, and that his plan in order to prevent them from getting into a teen dating violence relationship or domestic violence, he was just gonna not let them, he was gonna prevent them from dating. So how can parents reconcile not wanting their children to grow up too fast with still providing enough information so that teens learn how to spot coercive behaviors? What are your thoughts on the sentiment, and why do we need to really make sure we're going beyond this understanding of just don't do it and you'll be fine?
I think using a sort of, restriction, placing that restriction upon your kids, sort of puts them in the position that they could be the one that would be the one messing up in this sort of circumstance. I think educating your children on how to spot these I guess red flags of this could be a partner who may be abusive, is more important than sort of restricting them from dating just everybody. Just so they know that um, you know, abuse isn't their fault, it is somebody doing something to them. So it's like no sort of restrictive I guess boundary could prevent them from experiencing this when they're adults later on. So I feel like, just informing people on how to spot these red flags is more effective than just no dating at all.
Yeah, and I would say just it bothers me when parents say, I'm just gonna stop them from being teenagers to, it's like the answer to the problem, right? But I think that does more damage and harm than it does good, because if you're gonna act like it doesn't happen and then it does, it creates like this taboo thing. So then they're less likely to come back to you um and tell you when they're in that situation. And I think for a lot of our parents, it's just like this generational thing, right? They don't really have the tools. So I really feel like conversation as well as education and action is the answer to that. Not only just equipping teens with what the red flags are, but also for parents, like inviting them into this conversation as well with their children. And I know that sometimes it can be hard. Um, and maybe children are less likely to disclose certain things when their parents are around. But I think that the education just doesn't start with teens. It's really everybody that plays a role in that child's life. Um,
And Harris Shante commented something in the chat that said parents, this is just a summation, but parents should tell their own sort of stories of similar situations that they've been through. I know for me personally, just sort of entering college, I'm beginning to see my parents in a way that I've never seen them before, and it's a more human way. It's a more like person to person type of way, and a lot of it is because of these anecdotes that they're telling me now when they feel that I'm at an age of independence and things like that. These anecdotes about their childhood and their youth that directly mirror experiences that I've been through. And I think, honestly, currently I'm at a place with my parents that is the best it's ever been before. Um, so, you know, as far as that extends into anecdotes about domestic violence, I feel like it is important for parents to talk about things they've gone through, even if it's with their respective spouse that they may be still with, because I think it's important for kids to hear the reality of their parents' relationships, and also just the reality of who their parents are and what they've been through. Makes them feel less alone.
Yeah, I agree. I've always had a pretty candid relationship with my parents. Like my mom is my best friend. I tell her everything. Sometimes she tells me that I overshare, but I'm like, girl, you my mama. Like, there's no such thing as oversharing. I have to tell you everything. And I think just having that, now I remember when I was a teenager, our relationship was much different where she didn't want to talk about certain things, so she would send me to my cousins or, but as I got older, our relationship developed. And so I can tell her any and everything. And I think the relationship that we sort of developed helped her develop a better relationship with my little sister. We're 10 years apart. And so they have a much more open relationship at her age than my mom and I did at that age. But it took work um, to get us there. And I've
Yeah.
always been outspoken, and that's pretty much what they taught me. So I'm grateful for my parents for teaching me that speak your truth, and if, you never know who you might impact or empower by just saying basically what happened, or you know um, putting yourself close, like in people's shoes. It's really the
Yeah.
humility.
Yeah. And I think your both of your points about these intergenerational conversations that need to happen are really important, because you're spot on of like, one, dating looks different now. We have
Mhm.
social media where they didn't have social media like that, we know when they were growing up. So that's already a completely different landscape. Um, Parents being actually able to see their children's behavior as not just like, typical angsty teenager of like, they don't want to share how their day was. They don't want to, they just want to be on their phone texting. They, just want to talk to their friends. Like it looks different. And sometimes those are red flags that maybe they're missing because they're just thinking it's just, oh, normal teen behavior. They're just being a teen. So if folks were
Mhm.
able to actually have, real, honest, transparent conversations about relationships, about things they've gone through, about even if they don't want to share their personal stories about things their friends went through, because we know it's been happening for a long time. Like teen dating
Right.
violence didn't just pop up, right? Like it's been happening. And so being able to talk about it in a way that connects parents to their children, of like, being able to see them as a person, as Grant was saying, like you're a person, like you have lived experiences that I have no idea about, but all of that information is really helpful in shaping and guiding who I am, apart from just telling me, you're strong, you're articulate, you're smart. Like we need those other things to help guide us. And so the last question, I think we've gotten to it some, but I still want to ask it. Um, there are many people who experience teen dating violence personally, or have witnessed family and friends go through it, but with their own children choose not to share those experiences. Again, why is it important for parents to talk with their children or talk with their mentees even about violence and how it may be experienced?
I think just sharing intimate moments that have happened in your life, life-changing moments, is just important. It's important to share these things with your children. Um, like I said in the previous question, it gives your children a more full-formed idea of who you are. Um, but also, your child probably feels the most connected to you and maybe your significant other, or maybe their brother, or something like that. And I know hearing about my mother's past, about my father's past, felt like I was hearing about my own past, especially because I feel like when you're young, there's this sort of period from age 0 to like 15 where you don't realize your parents were on the earth before you. And so
Right.
Nothing
just
that they
hearing kind of where you're coming from and the things that, you know, people who are your blood have gone through, you know, correlating to domestic violence, correlating to just anything Black people go through. I think it is very important for young kids to hear. Gives them a sense of where they are in the world and how their parents navigated the world and how maybe they should navigate the world, by example or by the opposite of what their parents did. So
Yeah, I think you said it beautifully. The only thing I would add to it is just from a Black female point of view, is just knowing that maybe my aunts or my mom experienced some of the things that I could potentially experience or that I actually did experience. It makes me more comfortable with going to them. Like, I don't feel like they're going to judge me. I mean, there's always so much pressure around us having to be superwoman. So I don't feel like I'm letting anybody down. If I know that, you know, my family has been impacted by this, my mom has been impacted by this, I can go and tell her, I can be vulnerable. And I think a lot of times parents want to be that superwoman or superman for their children. And I think parents just have to learn that there is strength and vulnerability. So you don't always have to take the tough love approach with your children. A lot of parents want to take the tough love approach and then end up missing the love, right? Like, so just not humiliating, so, but being humble and with your children um, goes a long way.
Thank you both. And so we have a couple minutes. I wanted to ask our audience, using the Q&A box, if anyone has any questions. I think the 2 questions that were in there, Grant has answered about his film and his thought process there. This is the time to ask any other questions before we head out for leave our session. Any other thoughts? I know some folks were asking for additional resources, and we can send out those resources to you all in a follow-up email. Ariel and Grant, if you would like to share your contact information, feel free to do so in the chat.
Yes.
will do.
Don't see any other questions coming through. Folks, another minute or so if they're typing.
I can be contacted best email.
Email is always the best for us advocates. Fastest and best.
Yes.
So I don't see any other questions coming through. I definitely want to say thank you to our audience for being so engaged. Thank you, of course, to Grant and Ariel for being amazing and sharing your stories and your thoughts and your insight. Folks, I'm sure we'll be reaching out to you soon for more conversation. Again, I'm Ayana Wallace. I'll also add my contact information, and if you want to follow up with me. But on that note, I know Grant has a class and I will not be responsible for him being late. And so I'm going to have us sign off for the day. But thank you all so much for attending and participating and being amazing folks. And Ariel and Grant, we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Everyone have a good one.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you.